Today, I'm pleased to feature the work of Dr. Tim Jansky. He's an associate professor in the School of Education here at Eastern Kentucky University. I'll be monitoring the chat for Tim, so if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, and I'll bring them to his attention during the presentation. So, Tim, are you ready to tell us about these mysterious vending machines turned intellectual sparring partners?
Yes, let me go ahead and share and we'll figure out what you guys can see. What do y'all
That's
see?
perfect. That's it.
Okay, excellent. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and I do appreciate this opportunity to come and talk to y'all. Um, I'm going to preface what I'm saying with every slide that you're going to see today was generated from ChatGPT. And so this is not PowerPoint or some other crazy Canva. This was about 45 minutes of giving it a prompt and having it work. And I would add that when it got crazy and started to get a little off, it told me to give it 3 minutes between sessions and let it cool down. And so it's a little tip for you is if you're going to have it generate lots of images, give it 3 minutes because that's what it told me in between sessions and let it go from there. Um, so as we get started, I want to say that I'm approaching this talk as not let me show you what I do, but I want to, as a former high school teacher and a current teacher educator, some of the best PDs I've ever been have been the ones that have allowed me to like take what I'm already doing and see a new way to bring it a step further, one more step that I can improve. So I'm not trying to upend anyone's practice or thoughts about teaching, but I at least want to help you maybe think about how you can add something else to what you're already doing. And so I want to begin by saying that's what I'm starting with. I'm going to talk about a topic today um, that is, I guess, near and dear to my heart now. It's partially funded from a grant from EKU to study. It started out as an AI and reflection study. And so this is parts of that. I'm going to talk about data in two different ways, one of which part of this study, I gave a survey to students. And so I'll talk about that. But also this week, University of Southern California, one of their departments published some AI survey data, 350 teenagers, 1,000 adults nationwide. And so I'll be referencing some of that as well. Um, some of you are, I'm guessing, if you're a faculty member, you're teaching, you are navigating AI, and there are tensions that exist. On one hand, do I ban it and feel like I'm fighting a losing battle? Lisa mentioned this before. On the other hand, do I allow it and worry that I'm allowing intellectual laziness? Like these are conversations that you may be having with yourself and with your colleagues. And I'm going to tell you that the USC data actually points out that the outright ban isn't working. In their survey, they found that the same number of teens used AI when it was allowed and when it was banned. And so when we tell our students they can't use it, it doesn't mean they're not going to use it. Matter of fact, it's going to mean they're still using it. So bans don't stop the use, but they do drive it underground. Just think about when you were young and your parents told you not to do something and you wanted to do it, you hid underground. I'm going to hide this. And that's what our students are doing too. They're trying to get away with things. Neither of these approaches, though, address ways in which we should be preparing our students for entering into their professions. Um, our students are going into professions where AI is everywhere, and there are likely very little or no bans on what they can do. So, for example, nurses have systems that can suggest diagnoses. Business analytic platforms recommend investment strategies. Legal research tools help lawyers draft arguments, and design software for architects and engineers generate alternative approaches when there's a problem that arises. And so AI is out there into the professional workforce. And so the question that we as professors should not have, or faculty members, education, is not should we allow AI in our courses, but maybe the question should be how do we prepare students to think critically when algorithmic suggestions are part of their professional landscape? I'm going to say this a different way. How do we help them think with AI as opposed to relying on AI as it's their thought? That's what I want to talk about in this. And this is this is stuff that I did in a course. So I'm talking about things I've already done. I'm going to talk in general terms. I'm a teacher educator. This was in a teacher education course, but I recognize that there are people from lots of different disciplines that are present in this room today. And so I do not want to try to marginalize anyone. So I'm going to try to talk in big windows of disciplines as we go forward. So here we go. Right now, students are using AI. We know that they're using AI, but they're using it like a vending machine. So here's the metaphor from my chat from my talk. They're putting in a prompt, they're getting back an answer, and then they're using it. It's fast, it's clean, it's easy. When I asked students during this class, now I had 66 students took this survey, so this isn't a small data point. We're going to keep giving this survey in the future iterations of this course. Um, but when I asked students what they used AI for, this was at the beginning of the course. One student said, I would use it to help brainstorm ideas. I even used it a lot of the time to help me study for quizzes. And so that's an example of what students are using AI for. Another student said, before this course, I never saw AI as a tool to help me improve my thinking. Um, so in this way, like AI is the thing that made uncertainty go away. It became the easy button to use a Staples commercial reference. Professional thinking, though, the kinds of thinking that we're supposed to be training our students to be able to do, that they're the kind of thinking they're going to have in their day-to-day professional lives, it doesn't work with an easy button. Oftentimes, they're navigating complexity. Nurses are looking at conflicting symptoms. Engineers are balancing cost and safety. Business folks are analyzing and interpreting market data, which is fluctuating. A social worker navigating competing client needs. So the decisions that matter the most aren't the ones with obvious answers. They're the ones that come when we're holding competing priorities in tension, where we defend our reasoning to a colleague or a boss, or where efficiency doesn't adequately override judgment. So my work, I call this wobble. And so you're going to hear me reference wobble throughout this conversation. And wobble are these moments, they're unplanned moments of disequilibrium. And it's enough disequilibrium that requires one to pause and reflect and begin to wonder, like, what am I noticing here? What am I seeing here? And how does this matter for me going forward? And so AI is designed to remove wobble. And wobble is where professional judgment, professional knowledge, professional insight actually builds. So if we don't design for wobble in our coursework, we're sort of designing it out of our courses. Um, let's see. I need to pause because I forgot to say something earlier. This is what happens when I go on a script and then I stop reading my script. What I'm going to talk about in just a minute actually came out of frustration. Um, I have a course that I teach in person and online asynchronously, and there is a giant gap typically between the quality of work, the quality of thinking in the in-person students and the asynchronous students. What I mean by that is if I were to take a sample of my in-person class, their work, and the online students, and I put them next to each other, I think a normal person could notice differences in how the quality of the work, the depth of the thought, all of those sorts of things. Well, I ran into a problem in that my in-person section of this course was gone, and I'm only teaching it online asynchronous. And I didn't want to be frustrated the entire semester by having to tell students all of the things that they need to fix or do better or work on or think about. And so I created what I'm going to talk about um, today to alleviate my frustration. And it actually worked. And it actually was like I was blown away by the quality of work that I got from students. And I don't think it's a different group of students. We're talking about there were 80 students in this class. And generally, I was blown away by the work that they did. And I'll talk about the process in a minute, but I want to get through some other stuff first. I needed to say that at the beginning, and I forgot to. So we already talked about this. Students use AI to remove wobble and a couple other things. This is from my survey. that I did at the beginning of this course, I asked them, how do you feel about using AI? And 45 out of the 66 students that answered this question said that AI feels like cheating. And so they're already feeling as though what they're doing is wrong. And so there's always this gray area, moral gray area for students. And so most of them are feeling like this is cheating. Most of them held a negative view towards AI in their coursework. Only 3 students out of the 66 that took the survey believed that AI would help them become better professionals. So here's how students describe this is their views of AI before they took my class. So using it in classwork, AI in classwork was difficult because of this is how they described using it in my class. Using it in classwork was difficult it felt like cheating in a sense. It made it seem like I wasn't able to do it on my own. Um, Let me rephrase, I'm ahead of myself in my brain, but on my paper, this is what they said about their views of AI before the course. Felt like it was cheating. It made it seem like I wasn't able to do this work on my own. Another student said, this is an art ed major. I have always viewed AI as terrible. And another student, I am morally against personal generative AI use for environmental reasons and for a desire to preserve human-made content. So these students weren't like all lovey-dovey when it came into this class about AI. They were like they were critics, they were skeptics. There was moral resistance. And I'm betting that this is across 66 college students in a school of ed. I'm guessing that this would probably broadly be the views of students across campuses that are represented in this Zoom room right now. They use it, but they feel conflicted about it. And I think that's probably the thing that I wanted to point out here. Um, this comes out of a study that USC published this last week, and they named they how do you feel about AI is directly correlated to how much you use it. So if you like AI, you're going to use it more. Matter of fact, um, if you like AI, if you have a good view of AI, you're going to use it 2 to 3 times more and you're going to feel good about using it more than people who don't use it very regularly. This is like I said, USC data. I can give you an article about this later if you would like it. They name these folks power users. Power users are the ones that are 5 to 6 times more likely to see AI positively impacting their work. 60% of power users think AI helps them with their work versus 10% of the never users. And so we have this growing gap in between the kids that are using it and the kids that aren't using it. And so the answer is if we ban AI in our courses, like who becomes a power user? Well, if we're banning it in our courses, it's going to be the kids that want to break the rules. And so they're going to still be the ones using it, but they're just going to be hiding it. Maybe the ones that are already technologically fluent, maybe they've already figured out how to use it and tweak it enough that it doesn't look like AI or something along those lines. And then who are going to be the never users? They're going to be the ones that are going to be your A students or the rule followers. They're going to be the ones that like, well, I don't want to cheat, so I'm just not going to use it at all. And what this is creating is a gap, an equity gap. It's a gap in learning. And if we're expecting our students to graduate from higher institution and be able to navigate a world where AI is going to be at the cornerstone potentially of what they do professionally, we cannot be in this banned never user group. Because we're creating gaps between the kids that are willing to slide under the rules and those that aren't. And this is what the data from USC showed. Going back to my students, so what did they use AI for? Well, most of them use it to fix grammar, reword sentences, and generate ideas. Um, Ultimately, you can boil this down to removing effort. They were using this to make things a little bit easier on themselves. Very few admitted to using it to generate full assignments for courses. But generally, it was like working around the details, the fine details of things. Um, I would bet in other disciplines, your students are using this too. Like in nursing, they're using AI to check their care plans. Business, polishing their analyses. In engineering, they're verifying calculations. Like they're using this in some ways, in some capacities. And most of the ways that they're using it is to eliminate tension. And so that's where I sort of began to think about this because this is where my brain always goes is I always think of tension as good, particularly when it's productive and we can work through it. I have an article that I wrote years ago where I talk about tensions necessary. I'm going to give you the reference, the analogy I use, but a guitar only plays a tune when there's tension on the string at the right amount. Otherwise, it's either too sharp or too flat or dull. And so tension is necessary. And so when we take tension out of learning, there's no learning. And so I stopped asking how do students use AI and then began to think about what if AI could create that tension or that wobble. And so what I started to do was create a plan to use AI as a source of productive wobble, not just giving them extra work for the sake of extra work, but I wanted to teach students how to use AI to disrupt their incomplete thinking or to surface contradictions or to expose gaps in their thinking, essentially forcing them into a wobble and then helping them navigate it. And so that's what I did in the course that I'm about to talk about. And I want to show you a framework that you can adapt to your own disciplines that would probably elicit some of the same responses. Um, Before I jump into that, in professional life, wobble isn't something you avoid. It's actually something you navigate. You can't avoid it. It's there. And so we need to like take the training wheels off of kids and actually teach them how to navigate it in a safe context. And I think this before the stakes are higher, they don't in a college classroom, they don't have a job on the line. They don't have a family to think about necessarily where if they make a choice that's wrong or incorrect or navigate a way that they could lose the weight of supporting their family. And so we need to provide them ways in which they can navigate wobble, learn how to do it in a context like a classroom where learning is at the center. Um, so I created this three-phase model for professional judgment. Um, I want to say that this is designed to engineer wobble, but it's also each phase is kind of non-negotiable. This wasn't a theoretical framework, it was the assignment structure for every task in this course. So I'm going to talk about it in detail in just a minute, but I want to say that this will translate across disciplines. And I'll talk about that later. This three-step process will translate across disciplines, and I think it would be kind of easy. And you may already have assignments that you like. You don't have to change assignments to do any of this work. You just have to take them one step or two steps further, and I will talk about that right now. So phase one of this is you got to commit. So I have on the screen some generic instructions, but the answer is the first part of this is students have to actually do the work without AI. In a teacher ed class that I teach, what that looked like, it was like, hey, we're going to analyze some case studies of teachers doing some formative assessments. We're going to write a lesson plan. We're going to differentiate that lesson plan for a diverse group of students. And these are different assignments that we would do. But the first stage, the stage of this is that they have to do the work without AI. I would also add that this is the hardest phase to oversee because it's hard to determine if things were um, done with AI or not with AI. So um, it's hard to judge with this part. Um, but I think the important part of this is before you can experience wobble, you have to like make a stand, and that's going to be your work. This is my work. This is my thinking. This is what I'm doing. Because if you start with AI, then you're evaluating AI's thinking. But if you start with your own thinking, AI can then help you test it and think through some things that may not be present. So the first thing we did with every assignment was do the work yourself. Do it without AI, not yet. They're going to want to consult AI because it feels safe, but we're going to have to try to avoid that. You can't defend something that you didn't think up yourself. And that's kind of the idea with this. And so this is phase one. Phase two is disrupt. And this is where, so they would do the assignment on their own, and then they would go and consult AI. And I'll talk about briefly what that looked like in a second. But they didn't ask AI to help them make the work better. They asked them to challenge me. So not help me, not affirm me, but challenge me. And so I gave them some prompt templates to begin to think about that. So what did I miss? Where is my thinking weak? What assumptions am I making that I shouldn't make? And then we require them to dialogue, not just one time, but I wanted them to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I was talking to Lisa about this before we got on here. I used to have a research partner. We worked together for 5 years, and we had a standing call on Fridays, and he and I would spend 3 to 4, 5, 6 hours on a Friday on a phone, working through stuff together, talking about things, going ideas back and forth. Well, he is no longer in higher ed. And AI has actually replaced that thinking partner for me personally. And so and I actually modeled this for students in this async. I made a video of me doing this. And so we're not asking them to type in, challenge my thinking, and then whatever they get, we think, no, what I want them to actually engage with dialogue. And I have a stat that I'll show you in just a second. But here's what students, we made them dialogue, but also document this. They saved the transcript. Then I had them go through and they had to like highlight moments where AI created tension and identify ways and challenges that AI shifted their thinking. And so here's what some students started to notice. These are quotes from students. Using AI as a thinking partner helped me notice gaps in my lesson plans, especially around differentiation and clarity of learning goals. Another student, it made me focus less on just the activity and more on how each part of the lesson aligned with my learning targets. And then here's another one. It challenged me to think of things I never would have thought of before, how teaching a lesson may benefit some students, but also hinder others. This isn't just like new thinking, this is like cognitive shift. AI wasn't making their work easier, it was making them think harder. And that's where the learning actually started. And this is the kind of skill that's transferable outside of higher ed institutions. Like nursing students could ask, what symptoms am I not accounting for? Business students, what market assumptions am I making? Engineering students, what constraints am I overlooking? Like the discipline changes, but the questions and stance, they don't. This is adaptable to so many different disciplines. And I would add that you're going to get when I did these assignments, you would get some of them. I think I remember one being 60 pages long. Some students really enjoy doing this. And I'll talk about grading towards the end. So I know some of you are thinking, oh my God, how do you grade all this stuff? I'll get to that towards the end. But what I'm going to tell you right now, the students that did this step with like, like how do I describe it? With like thoughtfulness, open-mindedness, they're the ones that actually got the most out of this. And they're the ones that you could see a stark difference in the quality of work that they turned in as a finished product. I am going to pause here to say this. Um, when we're asking students to begin to think professionally, we also need to have them act professionally. And so that includes if we're working with AI, we have to be cognizant of what we may put onto platforms. And so, kind of like we're going to scrub any identifiers out of these things before we chat with them. In many fields, this isn't optional. Like I'm thinking of healthcare and other things where there's potential privacy issues. But in higher ed, it's FERPA, and so we need to de-identify things before we begin to upload things. One of the ways that I tried to ensure that this was the case is I used templates for most of the work that my students were doing, and there was never a place for them to put a name. Or when we're using lesson plans, we're making lesson plans, I gave them generic school data, student data, those sorts of things, so they're not tempted to even put something that's real into those contexts. But ultimately, we asked them to make sure that there was no identifiable information in there. So at EKU, I specifically recommended that our students use Gemini and Copilot because these are two systems, two platforms that we have agreements with, enterprise agreements with, were data protections. So students, but I didn't want to limit students to just those two platforms. Some of them are using other platforms generally. And so the idea is you got to scrub any identifiable data before you start chatting with an AI agent. So I wanted to just pause there and say this is just wise, ethical work that we probably need to think about if you haven't been thinking about that. Um, And let me move on to step three. And step three is where I think this is where the students had the most trouble because this is the one that required, I think, the most work. And this is the resolving your thinking. So students had to decide they were going to revise their original work and they had to use their AI chat to revise. And they had to decide, what do I keep? What do I reject and why? And the reason why they had to answer those questions is because after they revised their work, they wrote a reflection where they answered that. What did you keep? What did you reject? And why? Explain all of that. And so what we ended up with was a before AI, an AI consultation, a revised after AI, and then a reflection where and I have a degree in curriculum instruction with a minor in composition and rhetoric. And one of the things I view this reflection as is sort of a memo from the student to the teacher saying, these are changes I made, here's why I made them. And so I can use that reflection to sort of help me as an instructor think about, oh, okay, so AI identified this weakness and they agreed and they thought, oh, I should change this, this, and this, and then they did it. Or AI thought this was a bad idea, but I didn't like that idea, so I didn't take it. And they began to so they're explaining their thinking to me through that reflection. And again, I'm going to talk about grading this in just a few moments. Um,
Tim,
and I, th-
when you
Lisa,
have a second,
yeah,
Eileen asked a really good question.
okay.
She asked, what do you suggest when we are teaching concepts that students may not be able to tell if AI is giving them correct answers? And she used an excellent example of developmental math.
Please don't give me a math question. Um, This is a good question. I think contextually this matters because like I'm teaching things that are like skill based and they have to demonstrate the ability to deconstruct academic standards or create lessons that align with a learning target that they create. And so there's like a clear linear pathway in the work that I'm doing with students in this regard. And so I would guess that if it's a concept that may not be clear to students, yeah, I have to think about that. Do y'all have thoughts? Anyone in the room have a thought about that?
I do, Tim.
Sure.
I actually just did a faculty activity on this very thing, and what I did is I actually had AI evaluate itself on the sources and the resources that it gave. So I think there's a lot of potential of actually querying the AI itself to offer an analysis of its own outputs. It was actually really good at it. I had given it some sources that were um, very established, and then it actually some of the sources that it did not that it gave me that were not as established, it actually identified that those sources were made up by itself and gave me like an analysis of the percentage of sources that were valid and that it could actually reference and show me, and the ones that it had actually made up on its own. So it was just a fun thing, but asking it to evaluate itself.
That's a great point. And I also, now that you said that, caused me to think about this. I also use other AIs to check AI's thinking. And so if I'm using, let's say, for instance, I'm using ChatGPT for something because that's the Kleenex version of AI today, the Q-tip, the whatever the brand name. Um, if I'm using ChatGPT and I'm not quite sure, I may go into Gemini, may go into Claude, may go into these other ones and have it evaluate that. And so, yeah, you can check across AI platforms. If you tell them that you got it, I always think this is what I do. I always think they're rivals in my brain. So I always say, this is what Claude said, or this is what Gemini said. And then maybe they're like, oh, I don't think, ChatGPT tends to like be dogmatic about how it wants to be the king. And so it badmouths some. It's great, good, great. Claude has great ideas, but let me tell you where Claude's wrong. And so, yeah, that's a great, Tracy, you made me think about that. And I think that's a great way of doing it is to work across systems like that. And also put them in tension against each other. This presentation was essentially created that way, if I'm being honest with you. Like I wrote the framework of it in chat, and then I put it in ChatGPT, and I didn't really like ChatGPT's feedback to me, so I put it in the Claude, and Claude said, "Oh, here's some great ideas." And then I took those ideas, I put it in the ChatGPT, and ChatGPT said, "Oh yeah, let me do this." And I put it back to Claude, and Claude said, "You want me to generate a script for you?" And I was like, "Yes, please generate a script for me." And so they're like competing for your business and for your API tokens. And so yeah, let them work against each other. It would be great. Are we good
Yeah,
to
I
go
think
ahead?
Bob makes an excellent point here that, all thinking humans eventually figure out where AI becomes unreliable. And if
Mhm.
we can find those use cases where AI fails in some fashion and then develop learning experiences so that students
Right.
can find that out for themselves, I think that's also
Absolutely.
incredibly valuable. But I also agree with Mary's, let's just do spy versus spy here. Let's pit the AIs against each other. And then we can also use this, developmental math. AI said this. Do you agree with the process? Why or why not? Building those critical thinking skills. So there's lots of different directions we can take this. Great question, great discussion. Thank you, everybody.
Excellent. And so again, back to this third phase, this is where again they're revising their original work, making it better, and then writing this reflection. And I would say to you, and I wrote this to my students throughout the semester that they were doing this, I was actually blown away by the quality of work that I was getting from them. And I would probably make the case, and I'm going to go through because I have data to analyze on their work, that I would bet that their work was even better than any in-person class that I've ever had. It made my job of grading enjoyable. And I can't tell you, I think if Kevin is still in here, my colleague Kevin and I grade on Mondays and we go to lunch on Mondays. And I can't tell you how many times I told him how happy I was after grading. And that's not a normal thing, because I'm blown away by the quality of work that came out of this. Um, let me, let me talk about this first. Like we were trying to figure out, I was trying to figure, I say we, but I was trying to figure out how to grade this well. And so I'm going to talk about what I ended up on. But when I originally started, I created rubrics for their reflection, like the depth of thought, the quality of their AI engagement. Like I was looking at everything, but then when I started getting 60 pages from students, it became an untenable task to be able to read through chat transcripts of AI. And so I'll tell you what I ended up with in a minute. But what I think was great about this is that my favorite part of this process was actually reading the reflections because it actually showed me what students were learning, where they were, maybe there was a misunderstanding between maybe a lecture video I made and the textbook, and then AI pushed them to think things differently, or maybe they missed something in those moments and they were able to fix it. And so that's one of the great things that came out of this for me. Um, so here's a big change really that happened though. We never asked, I didn't, yes, students need to get the assignment right, but also they also had to defend their reasoning. And this is where the professional skills come in. Like not only did they have to say, yes, I accepted this, or no, I didn't accept this, they had to explain why. And they had to articulate that in ways that made sense. And so I did evaluate their reflections based on these questions and having them practice defending their reasoning. Um, this is a shift. Like I think some people would have to make. Like, yes, the answer is right, but no, your rationale is wrong because this is, or it's not deep enough, or it's not, articulated well enough. And so this would be a shift in the way that we think about things, but also, is that a wrong shift? Is it a bad shift? I think that would be helpful because our students need to figure out how to make professional arguments so that when they find themselves in a situation where they have to explain to a boss, to a client, to a patient, whomever, why did you make this choice? They have the capacity and skill to be able to do that. Um, that's a professional skill. Um, Also, it increased effort. Okay. So here's a student quote for you. The most challenging aspect was making sure I stayed actively engaged in my own thinking instead of passively accepting the response. Like this is the kind of response that I got from students a lot in that survey, because it does take more cognitive effort to resolve the tension that the AI created when it's evaluating them. Another student, said, "Oh yeah, the responses I got from AI are fairly surface level, and it sets me back working on my assignments when I have to explain it in depth." And so maybe they didn't get a great response from AI, and so they had to keep probing, and that was like it took time. And I actually, be honest with you, I told every module this is take you 12 hours to complete everything. And so I didn't set this up as like this is a quick process. I set this up that it was going to take time. Um, so here's another one. I will say adding AI to my workload has definitely made me more stressed. It caused every assignment given to me to have multiple steps. And so we're not just completing it in one step, we're having to do these three specific steps. And those three specific steps take time, they cause stress. And when they wait to the last minute to do things, it's really hard to pull off. So they did feel overloaded, mentally and physically overloaded. And that was like an outcome of this. So if you implement this framework in your courses, it's going to take them more time. It's going to feel harder, and some are going to be resistant to it. And so you have to ask the question, then why would I do that? And here's a big reason. This is out of 58 students of that survey that answered a question. They disagreed with or rejected AI suggestions 55 out of 58 times. And that's not just saying, oh, I didn't want to make any changes. Um, they were actually like thinking critically through what AI was giving them as suggestions, and they were responding with a rejection because they didn't agree and they had reasons to not agree. And I think that this is the key to this. It wasn't like just uncritically accepting or uncritically rejecting. They were critically rejecting. And this is the key. And I said before, this is where the learning was really happening. And you could see it in the work that the students were doing. This isn't compliance, this is agency. And so here's why it mattered. Like with the USC study that I talked about before, the people that use AI all the time are going to continue to use AI all the time. But they also are probably going to become uncritical users of AI. And that's not what we're after. And so we need to help students become to use AI as a sparring partner, as I talked about at the beginning of my thing. Not a shortcut, but a tool. And that's the professional skill we're trying to build. And if we don't teach it, students are going to become power users anyway, and they're just going to do it without critical thinking. And so we need to be the the point of contact for them to begin to think about this differently. So here's an example of what this wobble looked like in practice. So I had a student. This was something that she submitted. She wrote her lesson plan. This is towards the end of the semester, so this would have been about 5 weeks into the semester, and she submitted it to AI, and AI asked, which standard does this address? And she would look back at her lesson plan. She actually never put one in there. And so she had made a whole lesson without an academic standard tied to it. And she's like, oh crap, I need to go back and fix this. Now, in semesters past, I would be the one that say, hey, you didn't put a standard in here. You did this whole thing without like a point of reference, a standard. And then they would be like, oh my gosh, let me go back and so they're getting this done before they submit this to me for evaluation. And that was I think a positive that happened out of this. Um, I also at the end of the semester asked my students, what would you want feedback from a human? And when would you want feedback from AI? And so here's some stats here. When they were looking for contextual understanding, meaning like I don't understand the concepts that I'm talking about, or I need emotional support, like I don't know what's going on, I need some help, or accountability. That's when they prefer human feedback. And look at when do they prefer AI feedback? Number one, immediate responses. This is the new Googling of things. So instead of like Googling things, they AI things. But also this 47%, almost half of them said non-judgmental critique. Look at my work before I submit it. Help me make sure it's good enough to submit. This is the kind of work that they would prefer to use it for. But they still want the human connection. They still want you as the professor to give them the feedback that's connected to the concept. They would like you to say it in a way that's nice and kind, and they want to be accountable to other people. This is again out of the USC data. Um, and I think for the sake of time, I'm gonna just breeze through this. But 55% of the teens on that survey said that AI causes more harm than good, and they had negative uh, feelings about AI because they thought about themselves. They thought it would lower their attention span or decrease their social skills. And I think that these are important to think about when we're playing with AI in education settings. Like the never users these are the things that they think about. I gave you some examples of this before. We do need to have some sort of bridge that we can create to support the never users, the ones that are agnostic towards it or resistant to it, to become not necessarily a power user, but to be more willing and able to use it. A couple things, I'm almost done. Three tensions that I think popped up when I was thinking about, like, okay, faculty member, okay, instructional designer, okay, folks that deal with AI. What are some of the tensions that I see out of this? Well, Wobble takes time. I've already explained this is a three-step process. It takes time for students. And honestly, if you're grading everything they turn in, it's going to take a long time for you. The next slide, I'm going to go forward, and then I'm going to go back. What I ended up settling on towards the end of the semester was I'm going to look at phase one, their original work. I'm going to look at their AI chats, but I'm going to grade and read the last two things, the revision and the reflection. And if there are questions about things along the way, like did you actually change from start to finish, anything at all, then I would go back and I would have everything at my disposal. Everything's there. But I really only towards the end of the semester, I realized that I can't read every chat transcript. I can't think about these things for every student. There are 80 in the class. And so I just graded for the assignment plus their reasoning in justification, the reflection part. But it takes time for you as a teacher to grade these things. I get it. It's going to take more time for students to complete the work. And so sometimes you may have to ask, maybe this assignment is not the best assignment for this, or maybe I need to cut some things. Those sorts of things may pop up. Judgment is kind of hard to grade. So what kind of rubric boxes are you going to create to be able to evaluate students' judgment? It's subjective. There's lots of questions that pop up about how do you evaluate that. And so that's something to think about if you were to evaluate judgment. We did it based on, I did it based on, I say we, I had two facilitators, so I guess I could say we. We did it based on depth of thought, and we had a description for that, but it became hard at times. And then AI is inevitable, but what is our responsibility in higher education? On the post survey, 46% of students said that they would probably not reflect on AI, like the things they were learning through it, without additional support. And they would probably revert back to using it for efficiency. And then probably when workload increases, that would be add to that as well. And so we have data that says that students are, if they're not challenged in a class to use it a certain way, they're just going to go back to using it as a vending machine. And so if we wanted to keep momentum, this is something that we have to think about moving forward and keep developing these skills. We know that kids are using it. We know that they're using it, whether it's allowed or not allowed. And so maybe we should help them figure out these skills. And then lastly, yeah, I am going to finish on time. The thing is, like, if we design assignments that require Wobble, it's going to be helpful to them. It's going to develop some skills that they're going to need down the road anyway. It's not like this extra thing. It's not this thing that may cause complications to them or to you. It is actually something that's going to support their learning and development that can transfer into their professional lives. And so design assignments that require Wobble, and you will help them become thinkers, critical users of AI, people able to explain their reasoning when it comes to decisions that they make. Okay. And with that, I am done.
Fantastic, Tim. Thank you so much. There have been so many wonderful comments. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask Tim? We've got about 12 minutes remaining before we have to log off for the day. Feel free to come off mute or drop it in the chat. You covered so many fantastic concepts. I love hearing more about students refusing AI. And I'm hearing not just for environmental reasons or ethical reasons, but because they don't want to surrender their thinking to a tool and they don't want to see their critical thinking skills erode. Let's see, Robin says you might like to take a look at the Critic platform, which allows for 3-phase assignments, including peer evaluation of all 3 parts. It helps manage the load of documentation that comes from these process assignments. Are you familiar with that platform, Tim?
I am not. Get down.
Okay, I have heard of it. For one assignment, I asked students to complete an AI inclusivity stress test and add an analysis of co-pilot performance. Oh, that's not fair. I mean, they call it WOPilot for a reason, right? Then peers evaluate the analysis. This is followed up with feedback on the evaluations, and we've got a link here. Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that, Robin. Other questions or comments?
I'm scrolling through the chat, and I'm going to share my slides with Lisa so she can send that out with the video.
Fabulous. We appreciate that. We also had a request for the link to the USC study. I think you had a couple of data sets. One was your own and one was from them.
Yes, I can do that too.
Fantastic. Any other questions or comments?
I have a question, and I
Please.
apologize if this was covered. I got interrupted at one point for a minute, but how are students managing the costs of some of these platforms, or I mean, I know there's free ones, but it seems like more and more, there's a payment involved in a lot of these.
So at our institution, we have enterprise agreements with Google and with Microsoft. So students have access to Gemini and they have access to Copilot. And so it was encouraged that they use those platforms, and they were given permission to use other ones, knowing that there are usage limits and there are other things. We talked about the idea of scrubbing their information, any personal identifiable information, but they were able to use, and generally Gemini was the one that was most used by students in this class. And I actually have come to like lots of features of Gemini more recently than I used to. And so yeah, that's that. If they were using it outside of those 2 platforms, it was they were probably using the free accounts that you get, a few, million tokens of data.
Right. And I think it's really important too. Equity is always top of mind, because you never know which student can afford the $20 a month plan versus, some kid is rolling in the fat and can afford the $200 a month plan, which I can't even afford. And so I try to always start this conversation with classes with, you will use these things. No. What platforms are you using? So I can get a feel for where we're at. And then I talk to students about equity and, hey, you've got access to a more powerful AI, but the rest of us are using this. So let's talk about equitable practices as well. It's definitely a sensitive dance. All right. Other questions? All right. If not, we will clean up this recording and I will send that out so that everyone can have access to it later. And I will send the link to the USC study and a copy of Tim's slides. And if you have questions, feel free to follow up with either Tim or myself. And I see we've got a shout out for Boodlebox. If any of you have not tried Boodlebox, it is definitely worth checking out. And with that, I think we will call it a day, and thank you all so much for your time and attention.
Thank you.